Okay, well, welcome everybody. We're so glad you could join us for today's session about your volunteer liaison role. I want to get us warmed up beyond what we've already done in the chat. I'd like to get us a little bit more tied into the topic at hand. So if you could put into chat something that you would view as a top characteristic you would like to see in a volunteer. So put into chat a characteristic that you would like to see in a volunteer. Motivated, passion. Yep, absolutely. Responsive, many responsive and responsible. Follow through. We got kind of a whole grouping there where the volunteer kind of sticks with you, does what they say they're going to do, communicates well, professional, available. Yeah, we love those. Yeah, wouldn't we love it if all of our volunteers acted like that all the time? For sure, for sure. Well, that kind of gets us in the mindset for thinking about volunteers. But before we dive into the content, let's take a second and Peggy and I will introduce ourselves. So, Peggy, why don't you get started?
Yeah, hi. Peggy Hoffman here with Mariner Management. We are a company that just loves to help associations invest in their volunteers. I have to sort of share just a real quick, fun volunteer experience, which is not related to associations, but I was the choreographer for the middle school theater group for about 5 years. And there was nothing greater than getting kids to all dance at the same time, doing the same thing. It's kind of like what I wish I could get with volunteers. Christine, back to you.
Thanks, Peggy. Hi, everybody. I'm Christine Metter. I have known Peggy for a long time, and we've collaborated on a whole host of research and trainings related to volunteerism. And really, one of my focuses is really thinking about the future of volunteering and association management and what that might look like 10 or more years out. So I kind of bring that perspective when we're working with our association clients and offering these trainings. But like Peggy, I like to share a little bit of a fun volunteer activity that I've had is that there was a charity running race, like a 5K running race, and I volunteered to hand out the water at one of the water points to all the runners coming by. And it was just a great morning. Peggy, everybody was running in the same direction, so that kind of helped out good. But what I really loved about that volunteer activity was that it was, a short-term activity. I could drop in, I could do it. I had a lot of fun doing it. It was, I like to run. Well, I don't anymore, but I used to run. And it was a charity that I cared about. So it had meaning, personal meaning to me. So it really kind of hit kind of several different ticks of a volunteer activity that I was really interested in. And when we think about our kind of our personal experiences with volunteering and we apply that to association management, some of those ticks can come forward. And when we think about motivating volunteers, think about some of those from time to time. So while we're all here together today, what are we all going to be doing? So a few things that we're going to cover during today's session is that we're going to talk about the importance of volunteers to your association and that link to member engagement and how you can make the most of these volunteer relationships from as you as a staff person or from volunteers to volunteers. Ultimately, we're all looking for a positive experience between us as staff and the volunteers and volunteers to volunteers. So we really want to have that positive experience. Now, what are we going to specifically going to get into today? So we're going to talk a little bit about the research that's behind some of what we're presenting today. So there really is some evidence base there. We're going to explore some basic roles and skill sets that you need to effectively serve volunteers as your liaison role. We're going to outline a few common challenges that are pretty universal across very different associations. And we kind of group those into unengaged volunteers and disruptive behaviors. And we'll talk a little bit about those. And those kind of creep up when there aren't really good solid systems or understanding of the roles and responsibilities between staff and volunteers. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to introduce to you the 5 roles of a volunteer or staff liaison to volunteers. And we're going to go through those individually. And yes, you're going to get a bonus at the end of this. There's going to be a worksheet that's related to the 5 roles that we're going to cover today. So you'll get that after the session. So that's a little bit what we're going to cover. But we have a poll question to kind of get us started on what we're thinking about for volunteers. And this is to kind of get us all understanding how we are different but alike across our associations. So the poll that's going to pop up here on the screen is going to ask you what types of volunteer opportunities does your association offer? And you'll see a whole list of them there. It's multiple choice. Pick as many of those as would be applied to your association. So, what types of volunteer opportunities does your association offer? And Peggy, I'm going to lean on you to tell me when everybody's answered here. Should be kind of heating up pretty
Yep, we're
quickly, I
getting
guess.
in they're coming in quickly. Number of folks have picked the other, and I'd love to see you toss into chat when you say other, what is covered there. And if you want to put any additional description around some of these. So, for example, those of you that are talking about micro volunteering, or those of you who have picked projects, what are some of the ways that, what are some of the roles or some of the activities that fall under those in your organization? Um, we've got a little over 80%.
Yeah,
Let's
so
give it
licensing
another moment.
advisors, that could be like a subject matter expert, probably. Those are great. Oh, external committees, that's interesting. Industry, yeah. So we have kind of like the subject matter industry expertise. Those are really important. We have a few micros in there. Great, great.
So as you can see here, as I share the results of this, that we've got, obviously everybody's got a board. We put that in there because we'd like to have at least one 100%. But clearly committees and task forces are going to be the most common, with, a handful of you having the one-up options, the project volunteers. And then of course there is about 50% of you with some components.
Yeah, and I see 50% for micro. That's pretty high, Peggy, wouldn't you say, for groups that we've worked with? Because you guys might be a little bit further ahead than some other groups that we've had for these workshops. Some people are still not really into the micro yet. They're still figuring that out. So that's really great. Super. Love to see that kind of consistency and variety in there. So good. Okay, next question for you all. This time you're going to put it into chat. How would you describe your volunteer liaison role or roles, plural? Yes, you can have more than one. Now, let me give you some direction on this. You might say you're a liaison to the board or to committees or components. You might say that you manage the entire volunteer program for your association. You might say that you manage project volunteers or something else. So kind of how would you describe your volunteer liaison role or roles, multiple, when for your association? And we're kind of looking here for a sense of, where you're really having these touch points. And yes, there's kind of this broad definition of what it means to be a liaison to different volunteer groups. So we've got board and committee, volunteer services, member engagement, member experience. Yep, yep. Volunteer service, committee liaison, board liaison. Okay.
I love Anna's comment, manage member experience and engagement, and our volunteers are our members. It is part of member experience. That's a huge mindset shift that sometimes we don't understand just how much the volunteer experience is part of that member experience. And then I want to also just give a shout out to the fact that Stacy and Emily are both, and it looks like Ashley is too. These are all folks that are managers of volunteer engagement. That's a role we're seeing increasingly in associations, and kudos to the associations that are embracing that. Our C3 sister organizations have long done that, and I'm so glad to see some associations doing that.
Yeah, and there's kind of this commitment to having a role across all volunteers, kind of like Allison's saying, I don't really work with one group, I got the whole responsibility. So that's great. Now, no matter what you call your role or what you actually do, the bottom line is that we're all really looking for ways that we can be encouraging and creating an environment where your volunteers will be successful and your association will be successful. So that's kind of what the kind of the North Star is for all of this that we're talking about today. So, okay, we got one more poll here. And because we would love to tell you that everything goes smoothly and perfectly and all volunteers are absolutely stellar, but sometimes we run into some challenges. So, have you encountered any of these in your association? Again, multiple choice, you can pick one or all of them. And just like we did before, Peggy said, had us put into the chat if you want to elaborate on any of this. But have you had any or all of these, some of these challenges with your volunteers? Peggy, we got good responses coming in here.
We do. Two are shining are shining ahead of the other ones. Gonna give a couple more moments. We've got only about 75% of you guys in. So let's see what else you've got.
And as you
Oh,
guys are thinking about putting these in, just, know that these are common. Peggy and I have seen these across many different associations. And they often arise when, there isn't really good training for you or the volunteers or good systems in place for the liaison round. So it's okay to have these come up. So let's see where we are. Oh, there we go. Yep.
so
It
yeah.
kind of relates to what we did at the opening chat. Everybody wants their volunteers to respond, to show up, to actually be responsive, be responsible as well. So, Peggy, any other highlights that you see in this?
Well, it's maybe it's not a highlight so much as it's great to see that you are not dealing as much with an argumentative volunteer or a rude volunteer, but it seems like it's the participation, it's the showing up and being involved and engaged, because those are actually evident in the first three or the top three as they turn. And I'm sure, Christine, based on the foresight work and all the drivers that you've had a chance to look at, time is a precious commodity, and I think we're seeing some of that in our volunteer workforce. Would you say?
Actually, I think yes, time and carving out the space from your work responsibilities is getting harder. The other piece of it too is that you need to be having meaningful volunteer activities so that people will take some of that precious time and devote it to the volunteer activity. I think those two go hand in hand, that as time gets short, our volunteer activities need to be even more meaningful. So we'll just have to kind of keep thinking about that as we're working with volunteers going forward for sure. Now, we asked you all these chat and poll questions to kind of give us a baseline here of how we're thinking about this, that we really wanted to show you the breadth of volunteering. And yeah, we know that your association is unique, but there is kind of this sense of there are some commonalities that we know kind of happen with the relationship between the staff and volunteers, whether it's a committee or a board or ad hoc, we see some consistent behaviors and activities. And it's important to have this grounding here to help you position your work to support volunteers in the broader context of the association's activities. The successful volunteers support the success of your association, right? They're 25% of your workforce hours, for sure. And it's also important to look at what the research says about this, and we'll get to that in just a second, where we're seeing what the ASAE Foundation and Mariner Management have done with their research here. So hopefully you had a chance to look at the research that was provided to you, the summary in advance. Um, if you would put into chat, anybody who did have a chance to at least skim through it, what was an aha opportunity you had from the research on volunteering? What kind of questions did you get that popped into your head that said, oh, I need to pay attention to this more? Anything that kind of struck you as you went through the research? And while we're kind of waiting for folks to get into their thoughts on this, you know, my aha, when I thought about we put this stuff together, this data and the summaries, is that, gosh, it's so important to have staff who are really committed to the volunteer relationship. And that was really what makes a volunteer system successful. So many times associations say, here, go be a liaison to group. Good luck to you, right? And that doesn't often work so well. So when we have that good grounding, then you're going to have much more success. Um, so Anna had in here what matters versus what doesn't matter as much to a volunteer. Right. So understanding what's important, right? The importance of staff training, the friction regarding staff expectations and volunteer output. This is a lot. Oh, Laura. Okay. Yeah, that's a common one. Yep. We'll see. We'll see if we can get to that a little bit today. Um, yep. It's, the amount of work that your volunteers do. Absolutely. These are all great takeaways. Piggy, I don't know if you had a takeaway also that you wanted to have add in there.
So the thing, my big aha, and it actually is echoing Laura in a lot of ways. It was the sense of assessment. So it was the number of volunteers in both the mutually beneficial and in the holistic who said that they wanted to have a better understanding of their performance. They were looking for assessment. Now, I know there's pushback. Oh, no, our members don't really want to know they're failing. No, they don't want to know they're failing, but they do want to have a sense of how the project is going. And it shows up in a couple of ways. So my aha was how we have stayed away from assessment, even though really the system needs it. And what we're hearing from volunteers who can say this anonymously, so they feel somewhat safe to say, I really wish I could have it. And there are some really small, medium, and large ways we can build that back in.
Awesome. Yeah, these are great. These are great ahas here. We'll definitely pull those forward as we're talking to more groups because I think, Allison, I think you're 100% right. We got to rethink our volunteer systems on a regular basis, keep them fresh. Understand that volunteers coming into your group, these younger professionals, might act and think differently and have different expectations. So the same old may not fly in the future. So assess it, keep it refreshed, really do the training. I think these are all key things that come out of the research. So, Peggy, I'm going to hand it over to you to keep us going here.
Okay. And I research is really the stepping off point for me because Mariner was involved in both of those research projects, and I was on the research review team actually for the volunteering research, and then Luck was also able to be involved in a little bit in the very first volunteering driver. So I'm steeped in what does the data say. But to me, it's the data as compelling as it is. The definition that came out of the mutually beneficial volunteering is the thing that kind of lights my passion around volunteerism. And it says we can have a mutually beneficial system, a system which makes a volunteer meaning makes make which the volunteer makes a meaningful contribution, and that we make a meaningful contribution back to them. To me, that's the really exciting spot. And I think that what the research has said to us is that if we embrace this, we can solve most of the problems. What is interesting is that the research and the practice tell us that most of the issues you see with volunteers ghosting you, dominating you, saying yes, but not showing up, right, is a system problem. And part of the problem with the system problem is that we, the folks that are working with and managing the volunteers, are part of the system. And our ability to show up richly in that role is what's going to make a difference. So let's really talk very specifically about what our job is and jump into how we can use it to really to better our own experience and better the volunteer experience. Let me ask you, through a poll, which of these are part of your current job, the way you think about volunteer management right now? Which of these is part of your job? And it's multiple choice. Some may be part of your job in a written job description. Some may be just like when you're thinking about what it means to be a liaison, you kind of live this. Some of it may not apply to your current job, but we're going to talk about your current job and you're going to see some of these show up. So I want to get a sense of what already is sort of baked in to your role? Yeah, I mean, there's the most common one I'm always expecting to see is this idea of project management. So we're definitely seeing that across the board as showing up in most people's job. Excellent. Give a few more moments. So when you see this list, and many of you have checked more than one item on the list, you notice just how many hats you're already wearing, right? So even if no one ever trained you or named them, you are wearing so many hats, not to mention that you also probably have a title like membership or governance or events or certification, right? Let me show you what you and your colleagues have said. 90 and 95% of you say, yeah, we're supposed to be a resource and we're supposed to be a project manager. Far fewer said we're an information resource on the association and associations, or technical resource, or community builder. Those are the three that I want to lift up in your viewpoint about what your job is. So in essence, if I could, without going through the five roles that I'm going to show you, I could sum up your role by saying that you are an influencer. You are influencing the volunteer. You are influencing the work that the volunteer does, and you are doing that as the face of the organization to that group of volunteers, right? You are a partner. That is the mindset that I would love for us to embrace. You are a partner, which means you are negotiating with them, you are working alongside them. The shift here is, as an influence, is to understand that you can own your role as a partner, which means not just simply a secretary and not just a support arm, but a partner to get the group or the individual to the goal. Now, a word about this. Put in chat if this sounds a bit like you. Oftentimes, we find that we wait for the committee to tell us what they need or what they do, right? We are at the beck and the call of the committee. We are at the beck and call of the chair. Sound a little bit like some of the relationships you have? Throw it in chat if that, yes, yes, okay. Well, what if I propose to you that as a partner, you're in step with them? You have to negotiate this a little bit, absolutely. We're going to talk a little bit about how to do that. But you actually, if you take a bit of the coaching persona role on, you can build a relationship with the chair and the committee. And in doing so, you can get them to the goal line much more effectively, but also you can have better time at your job and they can have a better time working with you. Now, I'm going to walk us through five roles of a staff liaison. But as I do, I want you to go back to that very first poll. Remember when we asked about a common scenario that you face? So what I saw is there was a common scenario where people stopped responding. So let's just go ahead and let's come up with Sue. And Sue's on a committee that you are liaison to. And Sue is very enthusiastic. It certainly appeared that way. She showed up at the initial orientation. And now she's kind of ghosting you. Like you don't really see her that much. She doesn't respond to your emails or the chair's emails. So think about Sue as we talk about the five roles, and let's see if we can't solve the problem of Sue. Now, when I talk about the five roles, the main header is being a partner. And I love what Ashley just put in because she said we call our liaison staff partners and strive to really provide clarity on the work needed and how to collaborate. So it sounds like, Ashley, like you are on the same path with us. And I would love you as we go through these roles to share how you're doing this so that we can learn from you because all of this stuff is actionable, but you're going to have to figure out in your own way how to live it in your own organization. So there are 5 roles, I believe, to being a partner. Now, these roles, by the way, come out of the research, the mutually beneficial research and the holistic, in which we were asking volunteers questions of what motivates and demotivates them, what makes a good volunteer experience and a poor volunteer experience. We translated that to the things that we felt staff could or should do. Okay, so that's where the 5 roles come from. The very first role is what I call the valuable resource. This is where we become incredibly indispensable. This is where that indispensability actually allows us to gain influence. You see, in the case where ghosting, someone's not quite involved or stops responding, it oftentimes happens because volunteers don't have what they need. It could be clarity, it could be context, it could be access. But non participation should not be viewed as apathy, it's often uncertainty. If you want influence later, we must relentlessly be useful early. Okay? What does that mean? I believe that means constantly matching the volunteer needs with the resources that are available. So I don't think that anytime that your job is to do the work, obviously, of the chair or of the volunteers, but it is to remove the friction. So if you say, I am going to allocate resources, information, policies, technology, data, access to experts, doesn't have to be you, right? Access to another committee, access to training, you're able to match those to the volunteer needs and you become the key resource. Living this role includes being a lead in the orientation, onboarding, and training for your volunteers. Let's be clear. Orientation is what's your job, the rules, the guardrails, right? Onboarding is ongoing and it's about bringing somebody into the team, right? It's critical support and understanding the norms. Don't rely on the chair to do this. Chairs are have a lot of things going on in there and with their personality and sometimes a little bit of sense of I know what's going on so everybody else should. No, you have the ability in onboarding to help people understand the norm so they fit into the group. And finally, it is you need to understand that you have orientation, onboarding, and training, which is skill development and not knowledge building. So, key resource. So, if someone stops responding, and we assume that it's not necessarily apathy, it is uncertainty, the question becomes how can we have a conversation to get to the root cause of that? Role number two, subject matter expert. Now, this may shock you a little bit. Your volunteers are subject matter experts on that topic or that whatever that committee or work group or activity is. You are subject matter experts on your association, associations, the volunteers group, their charge, their goals, their plan, right? You don't have to be the deepest expert on associations, but you know the association inside and out. What does this mean? This means that as this subject matter expert, you lend context to the work that's being done. The volunteer does the content, you do the context, you do the framing, you help them make the connection to all the key points. That's what makes us a partnership. Now, it also gives you permission to redirect when something goes off the rails. So, for example, there's a conversation and it's rolling around and around and around. They come up with some idea that you know is counter to what the organization's resources and the direction they're going to, because you've established yourself as subject matter expert on the organization, its policies, its procedures, its direction, you're able to pull back and say, let me give you the context for the discussion we're having. So you're not framing a decision, you're just getting them back to where they need to be. So living this role is taking a lead in explaining the group's charge and the guardrails, and then on a regular basis, giving updates, doing check-ins to make sure that the charge is understood. It's even helping folks then translate changes going on around this committee into the work of the committee itself. So subject matter expert. Lean into their subject matter expertise on the product. You lean into the subject matter expertise on volunteers. This is where I lean in and I say the CAE is one of the most valuable things you can do because you have a full context of what the associations are. But also just spend time with your colleagues. They'll fill you in on some really cool details. Number 3, work navigator. Notice what I don't say. I don't actually say project manager. In some organizations, you are more of a what we might define as a true project manager. But at the staff liaison level, typically what we're talking about is you're guiding the volunteers. Now, this role is where poor meetings and non-performance get solved. If you are the person helping them get across the finish line, it means that you get the opportunity to help sure the meetings are moving forward, helping them know when they have to make decisions, helping to clarify next steps. This is where you become a little bit of schedule keeper, project tracker, coach for when you hit bumps, when you need decision makers, course correction, and troubleshooter. So living this role means that you are kind of a little bit of coach hat on. Remind them, well, what are we deciding? Where does this discussion need to go? How do we want to make a decision? What happens next? By whom and when? And capturing those informations. Let me pull in for just a moment on this notion of how are we deciding. One of the biggest things we notice about groups, committees at the component level, oftentimes, a lot of discussion, don't get around to making a decision, kick the decision to the next meeting. Part of what you can do as a work navigator is help them understand, make a decision about how they want to make decisions. This is where you have to know the options. This is where you support them with, hey, let's do fist to 5, or let's do a round robin. This is where you help them create meetings that matter, meetings that get the action done. So Work Navigator is being that guide for your volunteers. Most volunteer problems are clarity problems, not motivational problems. And if someone is ghosting you, or they're not showing up, it's because they haven't figured out the impact of what's being done, and they don't know where it exists in the continuum of what the organization is doing. As Work Navigator, you can fill in some of those. Number 4, community builder. Now, this didn't show up a lot on the poll that we said, but I kind of think that this might be one of the most important things we can do. What I want to sort of a slight little segue here, in the component benchmarking study 2025, we did a whole section on what are the future of components. And a large part of that was focused on the research around communities. And that is a really dynamic conversation going on in organizations. And what we're finding out is that members who are loyal to an organization are loyal because they have found community. And one of the key ways they find community is in their volunteer roles. So, how do we build community? We become the ones that are really our focus. We understand the value of community and we understand that this isn't social, it's structure. How do I help this group develop the community within it? This is where you solve volunteers who interrupt, their rude, dominating voices, quiet voices, the awkwardness. Now, I'm not saying that you're managing the people, but I am saying you're managing the container that they're in. Many people say, oh, wait a minute, community builder and all this stuff, that's the chair's role. It is part of the chair's role, but it's also your role because you are available to the group 24/7, unlike the busy volunteer chair. Plus, you're listening with a different ear. You're looking with different eyes. So, living this means that you are going to be proactive in onboarding. You're going to encourage the group to develop a community agreement. If you would like to know more about how you do community agreement in a committee or a task force, I will point you to Event Guard's incredible post on building community agreements. But the community agreements provide the norms around airtime and respect, around how I show up, around how I solve clashes or conflict, around how do we make decisions, around how do we define priorities. If you help build the onboarding, the community agreement, then enforcement on any of these issues stops being personal. It starts being personal and it starts being a better how do we work collectively together to create a group that is dynamic and effective, that's having an impact, right? So create the connections and the relationships, both with individual volunteers and between volunteers. This could be phone calls, it could be emails, it could be intros, it could be pairing, and very critically, putting on your listening cap in a meeting and tying what one volunteer is saying to something else that is being said on the other side. So I was I was a facilitator in a board meeting not long ago, and this one person, one of the board members, was talking about the experience that they were having. We were discussing generations in the association, and a younger board member was on the other side, and I'm watching the body language, and I asked another question, and that person spoke up, and I did oh, when you say that, it reminds me of what was said over here. Well, the two of them had that moment of looking at each other, going, oh, there's a connection here. That's that's what you in that sort of facilitator listening role can do, is to bring that. And you know what? Now those two individuals feel closer to being community. The bonus was the younger person was new. This was their first committee meeting. And I was able to help them make a connection with an older, more experienced one. That's the exciting part of what we do, right? That's the exciting part of what we do. The 2 minute drill. Oh, Kenzie, can I steal this? This is great. We share the speaking order prior to the meeting, and then each individual has 2 uninterrupted minutes to say what they want. Okay, so that mirrors in some way the round robin when you feel like there's people that too many people are talking too much about a topic, and you say, pause, we're going to do a round robin, and you go around the room, and in the round robin, the person is able to say pass. So we give them the opportunity to say pass, and we come back around again, we give them the opportunity. So for those folks that need more time to think or process, you give them that time. But I really like your 2 minute drill. So folks, you see, we can't expect our chairs to know all these things. If we're subject matter experts on if we're subject matter experts on group process, if we're subject matter experts on how the people in our membership operate, right? So we know how to help them have better conversations. If we're the experts on the charge and we need to get something done, we become the community builder. And when we become the community builder, we are connecting people, ideas, and experiences in ways that build the richness, the absolute richness of this group. Thank you, Kenzie, for I love this. So, and I do appreciate, thank you. Yes, Allison, I agree. They don't have to use the whole 2 minutes. I love it. I love it. Okay. That brings us roundabout to number five. And number five is an interesting one. I've had some people go, "What?" I've had others going, "Oh, that just happens naturally." I view our role as people that work with our very precious members. We have a unique opportunity to be the ear for the organization. So I'm going to summarize it by saying it's akin to closing the communications loop. But but what often happens is volunteers feel unheard, staff feel unheard, staff feels invisible in some cases in this whole process of working and getting things done. I've heard on both sides. I've heard volunteers say, well, the staff never listens to us, and staff say, well, the volunteers won't take any of our direction or advice. All right, I get it. But when we establish a relationship with our groups and we really lean into our role as partners, we have the opportunity to close the loop for leadership, to elevate our role without adding tasks. What do I mean by this? Well, keep the volunteer in the know. That includes concerns, observations. Keep the organization in the know. Support the staff colleagues by sharing and connecting what your group is doing, what you're hearing from your group. Share the observations the group is making. Maybe it's about the profession or something different happening in the workplace that's brewing, or the way people are reacting, the way something was communicated from the national organization. Share that intel back to the staff. But then as things are shifting and changing, share that back to the volunteer. So it's closing the communications loop. I guess what I would say is it's you being the translator between the volunteer reality and the organizational reality. When I was working as a staff liaison to a committee, I remember this was way back when I was working with a user group, and my group was designing a campaign to promote our software, and they had a great idea, except that what they didn't know was what the board had shifted along some goals. And it was important for me to not let this group go down the wrong road too far, too broad. So I was able to say, well, listen, now this wasn't anything secret I was giving. I just want to make sure. So I was say, listen, this is the direction that the board has chosen that we're all moving in. Let me tell you how this is a little bit different from what you're suggesting and how what you're suggesting fits in, but in this way. So translate volunteer reality, organizational reality. Okay, Anna, I love it. Can you give an example when you would use this for a standard meeting, or do you use it when there's a lot on the agenda and not enough time for feedback? Um, I would love to. And is that something that you can fill in chat, or do you want a quick minute to unmute and share?
2 minutes.
That's funny. No, I was just curious when it would be appropriate to have a 2-minute drill. That's all.
Oh, okay. Um, Kenzie,
Can I
thoughts?
speak to it? Sure. Um, Sorry, I was just putting it in the chat. We use it often with the national board for items that require approval or might be considered fraught. For example, I was going to use, we had a policy on ESG investing, which at the time was a hot button issue. So the investment advisory committee presented their proposal. They did all the work, beforehand. They came before the board, presented it, and then opened it up for the 2-minute drill, which, depending on the size of your board, you need to build in the time and make sure that you kind of save it for the more important issues, because it can get lengthy. But everyone had a chance to talk. And then when you go to have the approval, the motion, you don't have to have the discussion in the middle when it calls, is there a motion? Is there a second? Any discussion? The discussion has already occurred. And then you can keep the meeting going. Additionally, as I put in earlier, this comes out of COVID and 2020, and we wanted to use it to really amplify the quiet voices, the people who never say anything in the meetings. They often might vote no if they don't understand something, and just giving them the chance to speak to it. We've done it in committees as well. Depends on the makeup of your group.
Right. Well, I love it because it does it, as you sort of highlighted, it addresses so many challenges we have with volunteers. One, the most important thing is we can't get some of the key points about a discussion into the discussion because they're held by quiet voices that don't have the opportunity to make those to bring forward. But I'm guessing the other thing too is this helps run-ons. Because you know how we have somebody who has an idea and they cannot say it succinctly.
It helps with managing the time too, for sure. And people are very aware of the 2 minutes. We don't have a clock, but they can feel it. And no one interrupts each other. If someone interrupts, our culture is just where the whole board will turn and look at them. Like, how dare you interrupt their 2 minutes, which is just a nice thing for civility.
Right. So folks, as you're listening to this, this is something that, fits into the norms as well, right? So this is what's helping people understand how to share and how to show up, how to show up and how to behave. And that is precious because when somebody feels like they know the rules, they feel like they're part of the team. When I feel like I'm part of the team, I want to be part of helping the team move forward. So this is all part of what we can do, how we can be the best supports for our volunteers as possible. And you know what's really interesting about all of this? Because I just want to put this sort of as an endpoint to the 5 roles. Research, particularly the MBV, mutually beneficial, and the holistic, in that research, when we asked volunteers what was important to them and where they felt like would have an impact on their satisfaction, they pointed to things that were system, right? And one of the systems was their staff leader, right? The person who was their connection into the organization. So in terms of the broader organizational structure, our role as the liaison to volunteers is critical for through the eyes of the volunteers for success. And so it makes sense that it would be something that we should have an opportunity to really lean into in a very powerful way. All right. So let me go back for just a moment. Let's think about that Sue. Remember I talked about Sue at the very beginning? So Sue was a volunteer. She got connected with the committee. She seemed okay. She was there initially, and now she's not responding. She's not responding to your outreach. She's not responding to the chair. We just don't really know what's going on. In that scenario, which of the 5 roles would help here? If you were able to activate one of those 5 roles, what do you think would be part of figuring out this weak link in your committee?
Peggy, can you go back one slide and show the 5 roles again for everybody?
I certainly can. Thank you. Yes. Because it could very well be the clarity. I see that 100%. Work navigator is clarity. Yes, just
Yes.
that personal,
Ask.
that community builder. That's that one-to-one connection. Check in with Sue. Are you okay? Is this just that life got in the way, or is there something that is there a question mark that I can fill? Yes, Emily, absolutely. Because maybe they just feel like they are an imposter, right? And they need to have, maybe there's a little bit of training that could help them show up better. Definitely work that three. Excellent. Yeah, I mean, there's not a right or wrong answer here. You're going to lean in to the role that feels most comfortable, but I would agree 100% that it really fits in with this notion of this, you know, have I made sure they have everything that they need? And am I really making sure that there's clarity? And is it just a sense of I don't feel like I belong? All right.
Yeah, I think
So
that asking is so critical because we're working from our own assumptions, right? And just taking that pause to ask what's going on can be so enlightening. That's a valuable piece. Thanks for everybody for sharing that.
yes. So let me ask this sort of related question, but in the context of what we talked about, we refer to the staff liaison as being part of the structure or the processes around it. I mentioned onboarding, orientation, and training. In terms of the navigation, I mentioned that there was a tracker, a project tracker. So we mentioned a number of elements here, which are all system elements. And really, the mutually beneficial volunteering research that you all took a look at actually put out the six elements of the system. In terms of this, in terms of Sue, what part of the system do you think, if we really activate it, could help us address issues of non-performance or basically not showing up? A little bit tougher because I talked about a bunch of different things, but any thoughts there? Glad to hear that, Ashley. Love that.
Yeah.
That perfect. No, never too late. Um, Part of what we're asking you to do is sort of think through some things and sort of just figure out where they fit into how you approach staff liaison, being a staff liaison. I tell you, one of the things that I try to incorporate in committee or chair training now is to establish the fact that your staff liaison is a subject matter expert on associations and the association. And so I think that helping this idea of you being a partner is the training that your volunteers get about what is your role. I think that's an important partner to this whole scenario. Yes. Now, Stacy, I believe that we absolutely should have volunteer handbooks. The question we have is how do we make that as easy to digest and as accessible as possible? And as a part of a staff liaison, you might have a role in that, right?
And I'll add, Peggy, that the policies, the handbooks, the charters, those are all kind of as you call them, the rules, how you get things done. M- Marry that up with what we were talking about earlier about establishing the community, building the culture, letting people feel comfortable speaking up. It's the two hand in hand that really work so closely together. Understand the way to get work done, but also building that sense of community. So all of the five roles, they have a piece in the rules, but also the culture and communication piece together.
Yes. And I have to say, I love the way you just said that. And I'm glad we have this recording because it's the rules and the culture. And several folks have talked about here, like we have a summary document, we have the code of behavior, we have the Microsoft form that each leader must sign. Totally love all that. And I love the handbooks. The community agreement is to put to sort of give a specific example of the difference that Christina is talking about. The community agreement is, it doesn't do it can refer to, oh, you're going to live by the code of ethics or the volunteers code of conduct, but the community agreement is, I will pause and make sure everybody at the table has spoken before I speak. You know, I will prepare myself so I'm available for the discussion points. um, we will we agree that if you disagree, you have to come to that disagreement with a suggestion or details that help us be able to get to another solution, right? The community agreement process that Aaron Wolowick puts out in Event Guard is a great example of how to do a community agreement. And it is a great partner with the other documents, as Christina said: rules, policies, culture.
Yeah, we are a team. Love it. Yeah, absolutely. For sure.
All righty. What we'd like to do is, I mean, part of our goal in our conversation is to make sure you have the opportunity to ask questions and to sort of process what we've been talking about. And so I'm going to I'm going to first do a quick poll, and I'm going to turn this back over to Christine to help us get through a little bit of a reflection so we figure out what is your next step. If you could lay out your own learning journey, which of these parts of the role would you want to learn more about? Great. So, so Christine, they obviously were already thinking, lots of them are thinking, and they have some thoughts about what they would like to learn more about. It's coming in very fast. I love this. Um, this idea of embracing the role as the ear for the organization. How is anybody doing that in chat? Tell us how you are already looking to accomplish that. Give it just another moment or two, and I will share what people are thinking. All right. So it's really all across the board. I love that. Building community. There are so many cool ways of thinking about how do you become the person that makes those connections. One of the key skills involved in that one of the key skills involved in that is listening. So, one of the things I would recommend you spend some time maybe really focusing on the notion of how do I become listener, and companion of listening is power questions. How do I get where I need to be in terms of being able to ask true open-ended power questions that help people explore, that help ignite curiosity. Work navigation and project management is, I think, it's if you focus on the fact that my job is clarity, that can really help you embrace that part of the role. All right, Christine, let's take it
So
from
you get
there.
the chat has been great today, but I would love to keep the chat going here. If folks could put in just what was kind of the one big key takeaway? Like if you were gonna go have dinner tonight and whoever in your life you kind of recap how your day went and you said, "Oh, I was on this workshop with Peggy and Christine. Here's the one key takeaway that I got from that 75 minutes together." Put that into chat. What would be a key takeaway that you had from today's session? I know when we've done this session other times, we've had fun things like somebody came in just really forcefully and said, my key takeaway is I'm going to own my staff liaison role. I'm going to own the role. That's stuck with me for years now. I love that. But what would be a key takeaway that you've gotten from today's session that we would love to have share with other folks? Partner. Absolutely. Yeah. Own your role, be a partner. Easy to share. Manage up. Yep. Yep.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah.
Great,
Yeah.
Vic.
So many ways. I mean, in so many different ways you have to manage up, whether it's internal with your staff or with different volunteer groups with your chair. Yep. Yep, you are the subject matter expert on all things associations. And it is amazing when industry or professional experts turn to you and you and you come back and you have an answer and it really makes sense to them. Like because you can say, well, I've in my experience from being part of the community of association managers, they love that. They love that. So, subject matter, yeah. Yeah, the whole five. We were talking about all the five roles, they do integrate so closely together, right? You might need to spend a little more time on one or two of them, depending on your personal situation, but integrating all five of them together will really enhance the entire system. Oh, and don't be afraid to tell your volunteers. Yes, I had their yeah, my favorite line to like my family who still don't understand what association management is like, well, there really is a professional practice to association management and volunteer management. And here's how it goes. And like, oh, I never thought about that. Yeah, so absolutely tell them for sure. So okay, now these are all great takeaways, but has it really made you think differently about your role now? If anybody wants to come off mute or raise their hand or even put in the chat, you know, Renee, man, your hand just couldn't go up faster.
No, I think really good points. I think can really condensed, and I especially think I have been in management for a long time in different sizes of associations, similar roles to some of the people I see on this call as well. But I now run a very small state chapter of an association, and this is I have two and a half junior staff that I think these are easy takeaways to share with them because we talk about a lot, and I always say, in case the bus hits me, like this, let's talk about how this would be handled. Like, what would you do? Okay, how can we? And I think, in particular, the subject matter expert role, or even just having a voice to be able to stand up in a meeting and say, y'all are going to the Orioles game and we do not need to go there right now, is something that staff and associations culturally that can be something that is poo-pooed at a lot of places, and that's something that actually is really detrimental to an organization.
100% agree. Absolutely. Yeah. And I love the idea of thinking about your junior staff. This is a great way to really help them develop some of their early management skills. Working with volunteers is a management skill. And some of these techniques and roles that we talk about can apply to your staff to staff relationships as well, right? When you're in staff meetings, et cetera. So I think it's a great opportunity to train junior staff. I think it's also a great opportunity. Think about how many times you have a staff member who has an expertise. Let's just say they are your policy director and you're an advocacy organization, right? And they're told to manage the policy committee, right? They have never been taught how to manage volunteers. So these could be very senior people with deep expertise in a certain area, or they're a meeting planner, for example, and they're told to manage the meetings committee, right? But they've never been taught how to manage volunteers. These can be very digestible, 5 easy steps that you can give to either junior staff or very senior people who don't know anything about managing volunteers. So these can be applied to all different levels of staff for sure. Absolutely. So,
And Christine, I've seen a couple of folks I mentioned the subject matter expertise. I want to just go back to something I said and say, if you bake that message into your volunteer training, it gives you an even greater confidence in taking that role. I feel like there's comes a point in time where us being able to, in our training processes, be clear about our expectations of how our staff are going to show up helps the volunteers understand that this is the norm for the organization. The other thing I want to mention, because it's interesting, and I'm thinking about this from the junior role to a certain degree. If I'm suggesting that one of your roles is to be more proactive in helping, like, say, the meeting move forward, or more active in helping the group figure out how to become a decision-making body if that's what they need to be, um, part of what you have to do is be able to negotiate your role with the chair. And if you build a relationship with that chair, and you can say to the chair, look, as a subject matter expert on group process, lean into me, and let me help you so that you can be involved in the discussion. So that's a nice, subtle way of negotiating your role to give you permission in advance. This way, the chair doesn't feel like you're stepping on them. But boy, that chair is going to appreciate that you're the one asking everybody to speak up and step backward, that they don't have to say that. They don't have to play that role all the time. So just keep that sort of that subject matter expert part of the partnership really does help you.
Yeah, love it. Well, we have just a few minutes left. We have about 8 minutes left. I want to pause for a second and make sure that if anybody has questions, we have time for those. So let's take a second. Either come off mute, ask your question, put it in chat, raise your hand, whatever. But if you have any questions, let's make sure we get those covered before we talk about what are you going to do next when you leave here. Any questions folks have? I think it might still be rolling around in the head there a little bit.
I did have a question.
Dick, go for it.
Hi. So, um, I just kind of had a question. So we've been talking a lot about chair and chair management and volunteer management. Is there any sort of best practices for managing maybe past volunteers? And so obviously we don't want to lose or offend our very passionate past volunteers that are maybe not quite as ready to roll off. And so if there is any stars of guidance, some little sparkles you have in your back pocket on how best to manage some of our more passionate past volunteers, that you could drop in the chat or send an email or some sort of follow-up, I'd love to hear them. Because obviously, like, we don't want to alienate our volunteers. We want to keep them on. However, I don't necessarily have the same bandwidth to do a current committee and then have like a parallel universe committee, so to speak. So
Yeah, I mean,
I'll leave that for you all.
this is a tricky one for some groups, right? And it's actually, Peggy, I'm going to invite you to chime in here too, but I find it to be a source of a bit of consternation in association world. Some associations believe very strongly in keeping your past volunteers engaged in very open ways, right? Or maybe more defined ways. Other associations like, nope, they're the past. They get in the way of your current volunteers. So I think one, you have to understand the culture of your organization, whether there is space to create a productive way to keep them engaged. And that might be something very specific. I think this inviting past chairs to hang around the committee or the board is not productive for the current committees or boards, but having something very well defined could be helpful for some of them, but it's a little bit of understanding your culture. I know, Peggy, do you have any specific thoughts?
Well, I'm going to lean into what Kenzie and Renee are saying in chat, because I think that their points are worth elevating at this point. So there's two kinds of thoughts, and I'm going to pull those together to say, first of all, if you put in what are your approach to volunteerism and volunteer terms. You make it very clear, first and foremost, that a role has a beginning and an ending time, and that you may have been really good or really bad. It doesn't really matter. You move on. So setting up that sense of this is how volunteering happens in the organization. But then brainstorming with some volunteers about how do we support folks that we know are good friends of the organization, get some ideas from them, and then the most important thing is to get that written down and codified, make that part of the culture or the norm, so that you're not trying to do it based on the individual that comes in front of you. To Christine's point of view, when the term is over, the term is over. No hangers on. We have to kind of make that absolutely clear. You have to get that in writing. So, in your volunteer handbook, for example, there are lots of wonderful ways to say it, but to say that we respect that, and that's how I do it. We respect that there is an opportunity for us to bring new voices in, and we respect that everybody has a certain amount of time. And it is in that sense of respect that we have a firm policy that when you're done, you're off of that particular chair committee. The last thing I'll say about this is that I have seen that you can do a community, if you have a community platform and you put all volunteers, old and new, in that volunteer thing, and you treat them as a kind of a focus group. So you can give them a role, like here, your focus group. And by the way, if there's the person that you want to do this, would you mentor an incoming volunteer? So you get them in the pool so they don't feel like they're being kicked out or ignored. But
Yeah.
the pool's intent is to be this in the moment focus group when you have an idea that you're supposed to throw there. So I think you codify it in your handbook. And I believe that you can also lean in to having folks make that connection. And the last thing that Renee said that I really want to highlight is if you're having a difficulty with a volunteer, get help from the volunteers.
Yeah.
To redirect them.
And Peggy, I want to lift up one thing you said, and it's important for all of us to remember, is that especially for past board members, they've been on the inside loop of knowledge about your association, your chapter, right? They've been the first to know, they've been providing direction. When they move out of that role, they may feel a sense of loss and less communication and less knowledge. So maybe giving them a little bit of a special little newsletter or just an email every once in a while and say, thank you for your past service. We just want to give you a special update because they've been used to being on that inside track. So helping them kind of step down from that but still keeping them engaged is another way to kind of maybe ease that sense of loss, or they don't want to feel like they've been kicked to the curb, right? So definitely help them out of that system. So great
And I'll
question.
just
Really.
say, I do think, Vic, I will say there is a time and a place where amongst our peers here, we do say there is a time and place where sometimes a volunteer needs to be told or formally moved on. And that does happen. So that can happen too. It's not obviously the goal, but I've seen it happen, and you can't be afraid of it if it isn't working for someone to kind of go that route.
Yeah.
Yes,
Great question.
there is the saying that you can fire a volunteer, and I'm going to go right out there and say it. That if you put it in the volunteer, if you put it in your protocols, the fact that volunteers, you say it nicely, but the fact that volunteers, they do have to, they have to live by the code, and when it's done, it's done.
Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely.
Allison. Sometimes no volunteer is better.
Yeah. Well,
I
as
know
we
we
wrap
have to
up, we
let
want to
this
make
go. I'm going
sure.
to throw these, Christine, I'm just
Yeah.
going to throw these on the screen as you take us out with your conversation as just examples of how you might be able to act. Go
Yeah,
for
I
it.
was just going to say, as you're reflecting on today's session, we would really encourage you to think about what's one thing that you could do to go implement right away or start to kind of chew on and keep bringing it forward. These on the screen are super easy things that you could do. You'll get a copy of the slides, so you'll get this list from us as well. But we really encourage you to think about one thing that you can go do differently or start to implement. If you can stick around for an extra minute, pop that into the chat. I know folks may need to get going because we want to respect your time. If you do, thanks for joining us. If you're going to be joining us in July, we can't wait to see you in person. And we'll have more details coming out by email closer to the date. But it's been a great session today. Just really think about what you're going to implement, how you can take this information forward. And Peggy, any other final words for everybody?
I know that Carol mentioned we have a couple of seats left in the in-person. So if anybody would like to add that on now, they're able to, but that is in person. There won't be a virtual opportunity, but we've got a couple of seats. Just let us know and we'll connect with you.
So thanks, everybody. Really appreciate the active participation. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to see you soon. Good luck with your volunteer groups.